Hola, this is a relatively quick grammar lesson on how to use the future tense in Spanish. When I say the future tense, I mean the equivalent of the English will. I will do something, we will learn. This tense is easier than other ones we've done before, but it has its little quirks and strange details. Step one to conjugating the verb is you're going to leave the entire verb. Traditionally, we have gotten rid of the AR, ER, or IR, and then applied the endings. That is usually the way verbs are conjugated in Spanish, but this is the first tense we've seen where that is not the case. So do not drop the AR, ER, and IR. That's going to cause the verb to look a little strange to you because we will be adding letters instead of substituting. It will look overly long, and if you base this on prior knowledge, you could think you're incorrect, but that's the way this one is done. Step two is the same. We're going to add the correct ending. And in doing so, it's important to note that the word will doesn't actually exist in Spanish. The concept of the future does, but there's not a separate word that indicates it's the future. Instead, by changing the verb and changing the spelling of this, that indicates to the reader or listener that you're talking about the future. So let's take a look at some examples. Okay, here you have the conjugation set up, and notice that part of what makes this verb tense very easy is that the AR, ER, and IR endings are all the same. Typically, we have to memorize AR endings and then separately memorize ER and IR endings, which are different. That's not the case here. These are the only endings you'll need to learn. We have a, as, a, hemos, on. And you're going to add those endings to the entire verb that you're looking to use. You're going to want to study them in this chart, same chart we've used before, and really you need to, in your mind, not only memorize the endings, but make sure you're putting them with the proper person or group. So hemos exclusively with nosotros, as exclusively with tú, and that's simply something that has to be memorized, pounded into your brain. Here you're looking at an example with a full verb in use. The verb we're looking at, nadar, to swim. So in this case, someone will swim. And you can see how it looks different because we have not dropped the AR like we have done with other verb tenses. Nadar, the entire verb is right there, and then we add the ending. That causes this verb to be spelled with more letters than something else, look a little strange, and sound a little strange until you get used to it. Nadare, nadarás, nadará, nadaremos, nadarán, and nadarán. Notice there are accents on all the endings except hemos. Also notice that the first person forms, yo and nosotros, use the vowel E, but the rest of the forms use the vowel A. Okay, so on a pop quiz scenario, just to see if you can conjugate it from memory, you'd see a little setup with the pronoun to, using the verb leer, to read, but I want you to write you will read. So step one is to keep the entire verb, not drop anything. What's the ending for to? It's as. Leerás, you will read. They will dance. Once again, we're going to keep the entire verb. At the ending, what's the ending for ellos? On. Bailarán, they will dance. We will live with vivir. Again, keep the entire verb. What's the ending for nosotros? Hemos. Viviremos. Very easy conjugations. And again, a reminder, we have here an ER verb, an AR verb, and an IR verb, and they're all using the same endings. A, as, a, hemos, on. In order to use these in sentences, you do have to have some working knowledge of time vocabulary. There are many more options than the ones you're going to see here on the screen, but this will give us a little start anyways. Here are some fixed forms you can just memorize. No spelling changes are ever needed. We have mañana, pasado mañana, esta noche, pronto, which, contrary to popular belief in English-speaking countries, does not mean as soon as possible or right away. It just means the generic soon. Más tarde, all of these will be used as is. So, yo leeré mañana. I will read tomorrow. Ellos estudiarán esta noche. They will study tonight. Okay, in addition to mentioning who and what action will happen in the future, the next most common detail would be to say when it will happen. The next four here are a little more flexible. By using the following starting words, you can vary your time a lot. So en 5 minutos. You can see we're going to be using words like minutes, seconds, hours, days, weeks, months, years, etc. Could be changing all of that en 5 minutos and 10 minutos and 5 horas. And you can say when something will happen with that phrase. With por, meaning for, you can mention how long it will happen for in the future. And again, you're going to have knowledge of the time words, minutes, hours, days, etc. You could also be specific and say exactly at what time it will happen using the time phrase a las in the plural, or a la if it's at 1 o'clock, and then the different numbers for the time. And you could also mention the day that an event will happen on. Notice this one's a little bizarre. In Spanish, you don't say something happens on Thursday. You say it happens the Thursday. Give you a little idea then to use these in complete sentences. And from there, we'd use ordinary details. So we have Patricia will work. Trabajar is to work. We add the correct ending. It's a for a person's name. Patricia trabajará el viernes. Patricia will work on Friday. And then you could carry it on and say where she'll work. Patricia trabajará a la farmacia el viernes. Other details could just be any standard vocab that you know. Make longer sentences. Mention who she's going to work with. Trabajará a la farmacia el viernes con su supervisor Miguel, with her supervisor Miguel. And in that, you can use any vocab you've previously learned, but the key details would be who, the action, and the time, since the focus here is in the future. That's your simple intro. If you don't want it to be any more complicated, stop the video now and just review that material. Otherwise, we're going to move on to irregular forms. Recommend you don't practice these irregular forms until you have a working understanding of the rules. The good news for the irregulars is that they use all the same endings as the regulars. What makes them irregular then? Well, they use different or irregular stems, so the beginning part of the verb. So once again, here are your endings. A, as, a, hemos, on. We're going to continue to use those, but we're no longer going to use the entire verb. So you can see to have, which is tener. According to the rules, you would use that entire verb and then the ending, but you don't. There's an alternative spelling here. It's tendre, which is not a word in of itself. We would have to add the ending to it. So I will have would be tendré. We will have tendremos. You will have tendrás. And it has a bit of a different sound to it. So what you really need to study for these irregulars are these stems and the different spellings for them. Okay, I will be able to. Podré. We will leave. Saldremos. He will put. Pondrá. Okay, I've put the 8 most common verbs, and then I added there will be as well, which is just a little trickier to use. In the present tense, you learned this one to be I and to mean there is or there are, and you're just describing information. You're not mentioning a person at the beginning of the sentence. In the future, the form is always habrá. There will be. So you're not matching that one up with all these different endings. You're just using it to introduce information. That's it. You've got your regulars and irregulars. This video will continue with a second way of using the future that we've already done, a bit of a review. This alternative use of the future is ir plus a plus verb. So again, if this is too much for you, just stop the video, practice the previous material. This means you're going to do something instead of will do something. And so for that, you have to know how to conjugate ir in the present tense. It doesn't mean the future until we link it with the other information. Voy, vas, va, vamos, van, van. You're going to see the connecting word a, and then you're going to put the other verb, something that someone is actually going to do. So here's an example of that very briefly. Pedro va a estudiar esta tarde. Esta tarde means this afternoon. So translation, we have Pedro is going to study this afternoon. And that clearly indicates future. That's an acceptable way of communicating the future using this structure. The one we saw and focus on the video today is the second sentence. Pedro estudiará esta tarde. You can see we used the entire verb estudiar and then added the ending a. This would be better translated in English as Pedro will study this afternoon. Both of these options are perfectly correct. You can use off the top of your head when communicating or writing, whichever you prefer, whichever comes to mind first. But it's an instance where in the language, people are using both, and you have to understand both. It's not that one is better than the other. They're both out there. You have to be prepared to understand whatever other people say. And then when it's your turn, you can use whichever one you're most comfortable with. Hope this helped.